I remember the exact moment I realized I had built an empire and had nowhere to rest inside it. It was a Tuesday, 4 a.m, the kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like accusation. I was sitting at my desk the way I always sat at my desk, surrounded by everything I had worked for. 3 monitors. A whiteboard full of goals I'd hit, a wall of proof that I was somebody, proof that the kid who was told he was too sensitive, too much, not quite enough, proof that kid had been wrong about himself. Or at least, that's what I was trying to prove. To who, I still couldn't tell you. My phone was full of congratulations. The announcement had gone out hours before. We'd set the date. We'd finally set the date. And the comments were pouring in, hearts, fire emojis, people saying they saw it coming, people saying we were perfect for each other. And I sat there reading every single one of them, and I felt nothing. Not happiness, not excitement, not the relief I thought I would feel. I felt the walls. I felt the ceiling. I felt the very specific loneliness of a man who has never learned how to receive something good without immediately wondering when it's going to be taken away. Wait, before you scroll, I need you to stay with me for a minute, because I'm not going to tell you a love story the way you think I am. I'm not going to stand here and tell you she came into my life and healed me and now everything is golden. That would be a lie. That would be the kind of story people tell when they haven't actually done the work, when they found someone to carry them and called it transformation. What I'm going to tell you is harder than that. I'm going to tell you what I almost destroyed. I'm going to tell you what it cost me. And I'm going to tell you what it felt like to finally stop running, because the real shock, the real thing that happened when I announced that date, it wasn't what people saw in the comments. The real shock happened inside me. In that silence, in that 4 a.m. honesty that you can't perform your way out of. I built the life first. That's what I told myself I was doing. I was building the foundation before I let anyone stand on it with me. Noble, right? Responsible. That's what my father would have called it. You provide first, you prove first, you become first, and then you let someone love you. I built the discipline before I built the warmth. I built the calendar before I built the presence. I built the brand before I built the self. I thought that was wisdom. I thought that was maturity. I thought waking up at 5 a.m. and running 6 miles and meditating for 20 minutes and journaling and reading and optimizing every single hour of my day meant I was becoming someone worth knowing. And in some ways I was. In some ways those habits saved me from a darkness that had been chasing me since I was 9 years old, sitting in a kitchen, watching my father get dressed for work on Christmas morning, understanding for the first time that love in my house was not unconditional. It was earned. It was measured. It came in the currency of achievement and withdrew in the presence of need. So I learned never to need. I learned to be the one who had it together. I learned to be the one people came to, not the one who came to people. I learned that asking for help was a confession of weakness, and weakness meant you were one step closer to being left. Tell me something. Is any of this familiar? Because here's what I learned, and I didn't learn it fast. I didn't learn it clean. I learned it through years of being exactly the kind of man who makes a woman feel alone in a full room. I learned that the prison of having it together is one of the most convincing prisons ever built. You don't even see the bars. You think the bars are walls of strength. You think your emotional unavailability is maturity. You think your self-sufficiency is a gift you're giving her when actually, it's a wall you built around yourself and painted to look like a house. She told me that once. Not cruelly, not in a fight. She told me that on a Sunday afternoon when we were supposed to be relaxing and I had my laptop open and I was half listening, and she just said quietly, the way she says things that matter, she said, you know, being around you sometimes feels like standing outside a house with all the lights on, but the door is always locked. And I laughed it off. I actually laughed it off, because that's what you do when someone tells you something true and you're not ready to hold it. You deflect, you reframe, you turn it into a conversation about communication styles and healthy boundaries, and you say all the right therapy adjacent words, and you make her feel like she's the one who misunderstood. I was good at that. I was very, very good at that. I built a calendar that had no room for being ordinary with someone. I thought extraordinary was the point. I thought the point of becoming a better man was to be more impressive, more capable, more disciplined, more productive. I thought presence was a reward you gave someone on weekends when you'd earned enough that week. I thought love was something you maintained from a distance by being successful enough that she would never have to worry. I thought paying for things was the same as showing up. I thought planning things was the same as caring. I thought being good on paper was the same as being real in the room. And she let me believe it for a while, because she's patient in ways I still don't fully deserve. But there is a limit to patience. There is a point where even the most grounded woman begins to wonder whether you actually want to be known or whether you just want to be admired. And admiration is cold. Admiration doesn't sit with you when you're scared. Admiration doesn't know your actual face, only the face you constructed for it. Look at me for a second. How many people in your life know your actual face? I remember the collapse. I remember the specific texture of it. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a breakdown in a hospital or a moment of crisis that everyone could see and respond to. It was quieter than that. It was a Wednesday in March, maybe 3 years before we set that date, and I had just closed the biggest deal of my career. I'm talking about something I had worked toward for 2 years, something I had sacrificed sleep and relationships and presence and joy to achieve. And I sat in my car in a parking garage and I called my father and he said, "Good, what's next?" And I sat there and I understood maybe for the first time with my whole body that there was no arriving. There was no moment where the achievement would finally be enough. The goalpost was not moving. The goalpost was never real. I had been running toward an approval that didn't exist. And in that parking garage, something in me gave way, not collapsed the way buildings collapse, more like the way ice thins imperceptibly across a long time until one step is enough. I drove home. I didn't tell anyone. I opened my laptop. I made a new list of goals. I buried it. That's what I knew how to do. She saw it, though. That's the thing about her I could never explain to people who asked what made her different. It wasn't that she was beautiful, though she is. It wasn't that she was ambitious or kind or funny, though she is all of those things. It was that she could see through performance without making you feel ashamed of the performance. She had this way of sitting with you in silence that didn't feel like judgment. She had this way of asking one question and meaning it so completely that you found yourself answering a question you didn't know you'd been asked. She never tried to fix me. Let me say that again because I think it's important. She never tried to fix me. She didn't arrive in my life with a project. She didn't fall in love with my potential. She didn't take on the labor of my becoming as her purpose. She just stayed. She stayed present in a way that made my absence more visible. She didn't shine a light on my walls to expose them. Her presence just made it clear, slowly, gently, that the walls were there, that I was the one inside them, that I had been inside them for a very long time, and that was more confronting than any argument we ever had. Don't deny it. There is something about being truly seen that feels dangerous. Something about being known, really known, the version of you that's scared and inconsistent and sometimes petty and often tired and not sure what you're doing. Something about that version of you being witnessed by another person without them leaving feels like the most terrifying intimacy possible. Because if they stay after they see it, then you can't tell yourself anymore that the distance is for their protection. You have to admit that the distance was always for yours. I had learned conditional love so early and so completely that I had no framework for what to do when something arrived without conditions. My nervous system didn't trust it. My nervous system kept waiting for the clause, kept waiting for the fine print, kept waiting for the moment she would tell me what I actually had to be in order to keep her, and she never did. And that was the hardest thing. I thought I knew what rebuilding looked like. I'd rebuilt myself before. I knew the language of self-improvement. I knew the vocabulary of discipline and growth and becoming. I had the books, the podcasts, the mentors, the morning routines. I had rebuilt my body, rebuilt my finances, rebuilt my career. I thought rebuilding meant optimizing existing structures. I didn't understand that sometimes what has to be rebuilt isn't a structure. Sometimes what has to be rebuilt is the foundation. And you cannot rebuild a foundation while the building is still standing on it. Something has to come down first. Here's what I learned. Collapse is not failure. Sometimes collapse is mercy. Sometimes the thing you spent years constructing was never a home. It was a performance of a home. It had the shape of safety and the appearance of strength, but it was built on the belief that you were only worth loving if you were winning. And a home built on that foundation will crack eventually. It has to. Because that belief is a lie. And lies are not load-bearing. The collapse is the mercy. The emptiness after is the invitation. I didn't understand the emptiness as an invitation for a long time. I experienced it as threat. I experienced the emptiness as confirmation of my worst fear, that underneath all the achievement there was nothing, that I had been performing so long I had hollowed out whatever was real, that if you stripped away the titles and the goals and the discipline and the image, there was no one home. And I think that fear, that specific particular fear, is one of the most common fears that no one talks about. Because we live in a culture that teaches men to build the career, build the body, build the wealth, build the brand, build. And at no point in all that building does anyone sit you down and say, who are you when there's nothing to build? Who are you in an ordinary Tuesday afternoon with nothing to prove and nowhere to be? Who are you in the silence, in the stillness? Do you know him? Do you like him? Can you be with him without immediately reaching for the next goal to make him feel justified? I couldn't. For a very long time, I could not. The bricks. I keep coming back to the bricks. I built with the wrong bricks for so long. I built with achievement, with productivity, with the approval of people who only saw my surface. I built fast and I built tall, and I never once asked whether what I was building was actually livable, whether someone could actually live inside it with me, whether I could live inside it. She asked me once very early, she asked me what I wanted my life to feel like from the inside. Not what I wanted it to look like, not what I wanted people to see, what I wanted it to feel like from inside, and I couldn't answer her. I sat there, a man who had an answer for everything, a man who could talk about vision and strategy and long-term thinking for hours. I sat there and I had no answer, because no one had ever asked me that, Or maybe I had never let anyone close enough to ask, and the question itself felt like being handed something fragile and not knowing which hands to use. I think about that question a lot now. I think about it when I'm making decisions. I ask it to myself, what will this feel like from inside? Not what will it look like, not what will it prove, what will it feel like in the ordinary Tuesday afternoon of it when there's nothing left to perform? Asking for help. Let me tell you about asking for help. There is a particular kind of shame that lives in the chest of a man who was taught to be strong. It sits there quietly most of the time, doing its job, making sure you never reach out, never admit difficulty, never show the places where you are genuinely lost. And it does this work under the name of strength. It calls itself resilience. It calls itself independence. It says to you, in the voice of every man who ever told you to toughen up, you handle your own things. You don't burden people. You don't show your underbelly. You solve it or you bury it, but you do not hand it to someone else and ask them to hold it with you. I was deeply fluent in that shame. I had a therapist once, good one actually, who asked me why I found it easier to help people than to be helped. And I said something about enjoying being useful. He said, try again. And I sat with it. And eventually I said something about not wanting to be a burden. He said, closer, try again. And I sat with it a long time, and finally I said, I think I feel like if someone sees that I need help, it means I'm not worth keeping. And he didn't say anything for a while. And then he said, that's it. That's the whole thing. Here's what I learned about the prison of having it together. You built it thinking it was your strength. You built it because at some point, being the one who had it together was how you got love. It was how you earned safety. Maybe you were the responsible one. Maybe you were the one who kept the family from falling apart. Maybe you were the one who performed competence so well that everyone around you forgot you were also a child, also uncertain, also sometimes scared in the dark. And you got so good at it, you got so good at being the one who handled things that you started to believe the performance was you. You started to believe that the need underneath it didn't exist, or if it did, it was a weakness to be managed rather than a truth to be honored. She didn't need me to have it together. That took years to actually believe, not understand intellectually, believe. In the body, in the choice. She didn't need me to have it together. She needed me to be honest. And those two things are so different from each other that getting them confused can cost you decades. The transformation, you want to know about the transformation. You want the part where things changed. Here's the truth about transformation. It is mostly boring. It is mostly small. It is mostly the same choice made again and again in ordinary moments with no one watching and no music playing and no dramatic scene where you look in the mirror and see a new man staring back. It was choosing to close the laptop when she walked into the room, even though I wasn't done. It was choosing to say, I'm struggling with something instead of, I'm fine. It was choosing to sit in the discomfort of a conversation I didn't know how to win instead of redirecting into territory where I felt capable. It was choosing to ask her about her day and then actually listening. Not listening to respond, not listening to solve, just listening to know her. To let the knowing of her be enough of a reason to be present. It was choosing one morning to leave my phone in another room and just eat breakfast with her. Just eat breakfast. No input, no content, no optimization. Just the ordinary, extraordinary fact of two people at a table in the morning in the quiet, being alive together. I cried, actually, not in front of her, in the shower afterward. I cried because it felt like something I had been starving for without knowing I was hungry. I cried because it was so simple. It was so simple, and I had been so far away from it for so long. The altar. I keep thinking about the altar. When I say we set the date, I don't mean we just picked a day on a calendar. I mean we decided to build something together and call it permanent. And I had to ask myself, honestly, in the way that 4 a.m. silence forces you to be honest, what was I bringing to that altar? What was I offering? Because she deserved more than a man who showed up optimized. She deserved a man who showed up present. She deserved more than someone who had conquered his calendar and curated his image and knew all the right things to say about vulnerability while quietly refusing to be vulnerable. She deserved someone who actually knew how to inhabit a life, not just build one, and I wasn't there yet when we set the date, but I was further than I had ever been. And I understood, in a way I had never understood before, that the point was not to arrive perfectly. The point was to arrive honestly, to arrive as a man who was still building himself, but who had finally chosen to build something real instead of something impressive. To build a home and not an empire. To build something livable and not something merely admirable, the empire. Let me tell you about the empire. I used to think the point of a man's life was to build an empire. I used to think legacy was about scale, about reach, about how many people knew your name, how many problems you had solved, how much you had accumulated, how high you had climbed. I thought that was the measure. I thought that was what a life well lived looked like from the outside, and therefore what it felt like from the inside. Here's what I learned. An empire is cold. An empire has no idea who you are. An empire does not sit with you at 4 a.m. when you realize you're terrified. An empire does not laugh at the dumb thing you said in the car and then reach over and take your hand anyway. An empire does not stay. A home stays. A home is built differently, slower, smaller, with different bricks and a different purpose. A home is built for being inside of, not for being seen from the outside. A home is built out of presence and honesty and the daily choice to be real with one person consistently over time. I wanted an empire because I was afraid no one would stay in just a home. I was afraid ordinariness wasn't enough. That if I wasn't exceptional, I would be abandoned. So I made myself indispensable through achievement rather than through love, because achievement felt controllable. Love didn't fear of being known. Let's stay here a moment because I think this is the one most people skip over. It is possible to be deeply, genuinely afraid of being known. Not afraid of being seen. You can manage being seen. You can curate being seen. You can dress it up, angle it correctly, present it. Being seen is manageable. Being known is different. Being known means someone has access to the version of you that didn't pass the audition, the version that is uncertain and sometimes contradictory and occasionally petty and regularly afraid. Being known means the gap between who you perform and who you are is visible to another person. And if you learned early, young, foundationally, that love is conditional, then being known is the most dangerous thing imaginable. Because if they know you and leave, you don't have the protection of thinking they would have stayed if they'd known the real me. If they know you and leave, there is nowhere to hide. The rejection is total, so you never let them know you. You show them the version of you that earns the love, you maintain the performance. And it works for a while. It works until the performance becomes exhausting. It works until you are so tired of being the constructed version that you can't remember what the real version feels like. It works until someone sits across from you with patience and honesty and asks you a question you weren't prepared for, and you open your mouth to give your prepared answer, and something else comes out instead, something real, and you watch them not leave, and that changes everything. She didn't leave. That's the sentence I keep coming back to. Through all of it, through the emotional unavailability, through the times I redirected instead of received, through the times I showed up optimized instead of honest, through the times I was so inside my own head that I wasn't actually in the room with her at all. She didn't leave, not because she had no standards, not because she was willing to accept anything, but because she could see something I couldn't see yet. She could see that the distance wasn't indifference. She could see that the performance wasn't arrogance. She could see that what looked like a man who didn't need anything was actually a man who needed so much and was so terrified of what needing meant that he had built an entire architecture of self-sufficiency to avoid ever having to find out. She waited. Not passively, not in a way that abandoned herself. She had her own life, her own work, her own becoming. She wasn't sitting in a corner waiting for me to arrive. She was living. And in the living of her own life, she kept the door open, kept the space honest, kept asking the questions that mattered with the patience of someone who understood that arriving takes time and that the journey is not a straight line. And slowly, imperfectly, inconsistently, in the way real things grow, I started to walk through the door. Here's what I learned about identity. About who you are when you stop performing. You are quieter than the performance. You are less certain than the performance. You are more tender than the performance. You have more questions than the performance ever let you ask. You are interested in things that don't optimize for anything. You find pleasure in simple things. A meal, a walk, an hour without agenda, a conversation that goes nowhere in particular and feels like exactly where you needed to be. You are someone who needed to be held sometimes and didn't know how to ask. You are someone who was frightened for a long time and built your whole life around making sure no one could tell. You are someone who is capable of love in a way that the performance never was. Messier, less impressive, more real. And the rebuilding of identity doesn't happen in grand gestures. It doesn't happen in dramatic declarations. It happens in the choosing. In the daily, undramatic choosing of presence over performance, of honesty over impression, of ordinary Tuesday morning over every carefully constructed exceptional moment. It happens in the breakfast with no phone. It happens in the I'm struggling with something. It happens in the closed laptop. It happens in the question answered honestly when the deflection was right there and you chose not to take it. It happens brick by brick, foundation first, and then the date. We talked about it for a long time before we said it. I mean that literally. We talked about what marriage was to us, what we wanted it to feel like, what we were promising each other, what kind of home we were committing to build. We didn't just pick a venue and a catering menu and a playlist. We had the hard conversations. We talked about fear and about patterns and about the things we'd each carried from our families and the things we wanted to set down. We talked about what it meant to stay, not stay out of obligation, but stay out of choice, renewed choice, daily choice. She said something in one of those conversations that I think about almost every day now. She said, I don't want you to be perfect. I want you to be real. I want to know that when something is hard, you'll say it's hard. I want to know that when you're lost, you'll say you're lost. I want to know that this, and she gestured between us, is a place where you actually live, not a place you visit when you've finished being impressive somewhere else. I want to know that this is a place where you actually live, I wrote it down that night. I still have it, so I announced the date, and at 4 a.m, sitting in the silence, with all those comments rolling in, feeling the walls and the ceiling and that particular loneliness, I understood what was happening. I understood that the part of me that felt nothing was the old part, the constructed part, the part that had spent years processing good things through a filter of suspicion, through the question of when this is going to be taken away, through the childhood reflex of not getting too comfortable with something good, and I sat with it. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't open a new goal list. I didn't redirect. I sat with it. And then I walked to where she was asleep, and I stood in the doorway for a minute, just looking, just being someone who is about to marry the most honest person he has ever known, and letting that be real, letting the goodness of it be real without immediately protecting myself from it. And then I went back to my desk and I closed the laptop and I went to sleep. Here's what I want to say to you now. Not to the version of you that has it together, to the version that wakes up at 4 a.m. and feels the walls, the version that is so tired of performing, the version that has built something impressive and still feels empty, the version that is standing at the door of something real and finding 100 reasons not to walk through. I want to say the emptiness is an invitation. I know that sounds like the kind of thing that should be on a poster and therefore doesn't mean anything, but stay with me. The emptiness is not the end of the story. The emptiness is what happens when the structure you've been using to outrun yourself stops working, when the noise isn't loud enough anymore, when the next goal doesn't fill the thing the last goal couldn't. That moment, that 4 a.m. collapse, that parking garage silence, that quiet Tuesday where everything external is fine and everything internal is questioning. That is not your failure. That is your foundation making contact with reality. That is the beginning of something that the performance never could have been. Look at me for a second. You are allowed to need things. You are allowed to not have it together. You are allowed to let someone see you in the gap between who you are and who you're trying to be and stay there with them without rushing to close the gap with another achievement. You are allowed to build slowly, to build honestly, to build something real instead of something impressive. You are allowed to stop performing love and start being present for it. You are allowed to be ordinary with someone and let that be enough. Let it be more than enough. Let it be everything. The collapse was mercy. The emptiness was invitation. The rebuilding took longer than any project I'd ever worked on and demanded more honesty than I thought I was capable of, and required me to lay down tools I had been using to protect myself since I was 9 years old, sitting in that kitchen, watching my father get dressed, learning the terms. But here's what is on the other side of that. Here's what I found when I stopped building an empire and started building a home. Warmth. Actual warmth. Not the warm performance of it, but the thing itself. The specific warmth of being in a room with someone who knows your actual face and chose it anyway. The specific warmth of a conversation that has no objective. The specific warmth of being tired and not pretending you're not. Of saying today was hard to someone who will say I know and mean it. Of waking up and the first thought not being about production or optimization, but about the person breathing next to you and the extraordinary ordinariness of being alive together one more day. That is what is on the other side. Don't deny it. You want that. Not the performance of it. The thing itself. And maybe you've been building the way I built, outward and upward and fast, toward impressiveness, toward proof, toward the approval of a version of love that required you to earn it. And maybe the foundation is showing its cracks. Maybe the silence is getting louder. Maybe the next achievement is already starting to feel like it won't be enough before you've even reached it. I'm not going to tell you what to do with that. I'm not going to give you a plan or a system or a framework. I'm going to ask you the question she asked me. What do you want your life to feel like from the inside? Not what do you want it to look like? Not what do you want people to say about it? What do you want it to feel like from inside the ordinary Tuesday afternoon of it, with nothing left to prove and no audience watching? Just you and the life you built and the question of whether you can actually live in it. I know what I want mine to feel like. I want it to feel like the breakfast with no phone. I want it to feel like the closed laptop. I want it to feel like the I'm struggling with something and the staying anyway. I want it to feel like a home that was built slowly with honest bricks on a foundation that can actually hold what I'm asking it to hold. I want it to feel like the doorway at 4 a.m, standing there, looking in, letting the good thing be real. I'm getting married because I finally understand what marriage is not. It is not a destination. It is not a trophy. It is not a proof of arrival or an announcement of completion or a signal that you have finished the work of becoming. It is the choosing. It is the daily, renewed, imperfect, eyes-open choosing of presence over performance, of honesty over impression, of home over empire. It is the building of something you can actually live inside. And I, for the first time in my life, am ready to live inside something. Today I announced the date, and what happened next shocked everyone. What happened next was nothing that showed up in the comments. What happened next was a man who had spent 30-something years running from his own silence, finally, quietly, without ceremony, turned around and walked toward it. And the silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything that had always been there, waiting underneath the noise of becoming, the warmth, the need, the tenderness, the ordinary, extraordinary fact of being alive and capable of love, and finally willing to stop performing it and start living it. That's the real story. That's what actually happened. And I genuinely wonder if some version of it is happening to you too, right now, under the noise, under the goals and the optimization and the image and the careful construction of the man you're performing. I wonder if there's a silence that's been waiting for you. I wonder if there's a foundation that needs to come down so a real one can be built. I wonder if there's someone, or maybe just some version of yourself, standing at a door somewhere, patient, honest, with the light on, waiting for you to stop being impressive and start being real. The door is open. You know it's open. Walk through it.